All right, welcome back. We are on letter 53, and this is on the faults of the spirit. Let's jump into this. In verse 1, he says, "You can persuade me into almost anything now, for I was recently persuaded to travel by water. We cast off when the sea was lazily smooth. The sky, to be sure, was heavy with nasty clouds, such as usually break into rain or squalls. Still, I thought that the few miles between Putillo and my dear Parthenope might run off in quick time, despite the uncertain and lowering sky. So, in order to get away more quickly, I made straight out to sea for Nessus with the purpose of cutting across all the inlets." Okay, so this is just a description of him going on this trip. Let's see what happens. In verse 2, he says, "But when we were so far out that it made little difference to me whether I returned or kept on, the calm weather which had enticed me came to naught. The storm had not yet begun, but the groundswell was on, and the waves kept steadily coming faster. I began to ask the pilot to put me ashore somewhere. He replied that the coast was rough and a bad place to land, and that in a storm he feared a lee shore more than anything else." Okay, so again, the story continues on. Not too much to say about this. In verse 3, he says, "But I was suffering too grievously to think of the danger, since a sluggish seasickness which brought no relief was racking me, the sort that upsets the liver without clearing it. Therefore I laid down the law to my pilot, forcing him to make for the shore willy-nilly. When we drew near, I did not wait for things to be done in accordance with Virgil's orders until, quote, prow face seawards, or anchor plunge from bow. I remembered my profession as a veteran devotee of cold water, and, clad as I was in my cloak, let myself down into the sea just as a cold water bather should." Okay, so his story continues. Okay, so he forced the captain of the ship to bring him to the shore, and he jumped in the water because he was seasick badly. All right. "What do you think my feelings were? Scrambling over the rocks, searching out the path, or making one for myself. I understood that sailors have good reason to fear the land. It is hard to believe what I endured when I could not endure myself. You may be sure that the reason why Ulysses was shipwrecked on every possible occasion was not so much because the sea god was angry with him from his birth. He was simply subject to seasickness. And in the future, I also, if I must go anywhere by sea, shall only reach my destination in the 20th year." Let me see what 20th year he says here. Ulysses took 10 years on his journey because of seasickness. Seneca will need twice as many. So it's kind of interesting. The story so far, what he's saying. So I think what he's kind of saying here is he's like, look, I didn't even care about my life. The seasickness was so bad that I was making a decision against that, trying to get away from that pain, that thing that I couldn't endure. It was so bad, right? And he's saying that he's compared to Ulysses, why he was shipwrecked in every possible occasion, right? And he's saying that if the next time I go to sea, it's going to take me 20 years. It's going to take me twice as long as him, right? "When I finally calmed my stomach, for you know that one does not escape seasickness by escaping the sea, and refresh my body with a rub down, I begin to reflect how completely we forget or ignore our failings, even those that affect the body, which are continually reminding of us of their existence, not to mention those which are more serious in proportion as they are more hidden." So he's saying, okay, look, after I finally was over the seasickness, I sort of think about the failings of ourselves that we ignore, right? He says in verse 6, "A slight ague deceives us, but when it has increased and a genuine fever has begun to burn, it forces even a hardy man who can endure much suffering to admit that he is ill. There is pain in the foot and tingling sensation in the joints, but we still hide the complaint and announce that we have sprained a joint or else are tired from overexercise. Then the ailment, uncertain at first, must be given a name, and when it begins to swell the ankles also and has made both our feet right feet, we are bound to confess that we have the gout." Okay, so he's describing how people will fight off and pretend like they're not sick when they are sick. In this case, he's describing gout, okay? "The opposite holds true of diseases of the soul. The worse one is, the less one perceives it. You need not be surprised, my beloved Lucilius, for he whose sleep is light pursues visions during slumber, and sometimes, although asleep, is conscious that he is asleep. But sound slumber annihilates our very dreams and shrinks the spirit down so deep that it has no perception of self. So he's saying that now he's drawing the parallel and making the transition between the body and the soul. And he's saying that the same thing is true of the soul, right? We have these limitations, these shortcomings, these sicknesses that we don't want to believe that we have, okay? And until they become so bad. In verse 8, he says, "Why will no man confess his faults? Because he is still in their grasp. Only he who is awake can recount his dream. And similarly, a confession of sin is a proof of sound mind. Let us therefore rouse ourselves, that we may be able to correct our mistakes. Philosophy, however, is the only power that can stir us, the only power that can shake off our deep slumber. Devote yourself wholly to philosophy. You are worthy of her. She is worthy of you. Greet one another with a loving embrace. Say farewell to all other interests with courage and frankness. Do not study philosophy merely during your spare time." So he's saying here that when he was talking about the dream, is that you can't know that you're dreaming and remember the dream until you're actually awake. And so is the same with your faults, right? You only when you're awake can you recount the dream. Only when you're awake can you realize the faults that you have. And he's saying that philosophy is the thing that can do this for us. Philosophy, as you study philosophy, you will start to see the faults that you have, and you will become awake. If you were ill, you would stop caring for your personal concerns and forget your business duties. You would not think highly enough of any client to take active charge of his case during a slight abatement of your sufferings. You would try your hardest to be rid of the illness as soon as possible. What then? Shall you not do the same thing now? Throw aside all hindrances and give up your time to getting a sound mind. For no man can attain it if he is engrossed in other matters. Philosophy wields her own authority. She appoints her own time and does not allow it to be appointed for her. She is not a thing to be followed at odd times, but a subject for daily practice. She is mistress, and she commands our attendance. So he's saying, look, if you're really, really sick, you wouldn't, you'd stop doing the other things that you need to do in life, right? You would forget about your business duties. You wouldn't just as soon as you're not feeling quite as sick, go and attend to a client. You'd make sure you got fully well, and then you would get back to business. He's saying the same thing with your mind, right? Philosophy, you can't just study it in your part-time. You need to devote your whole life to it until you cure your mind, and then you can do other things. He says in verse 10, Alexander, when a certain state promised him part of its territory and half its entire property, replied, I invaded Asia with the intention not of accepting what you might give, but allowing you to keep what I might leave. Philosophy likewise keeps saying to all occupations, I do not intend to accept the time which you have left over, but I shall allow you to keep what time I myself shall leave. So he's saying that, Alexander the Great, when he invaded Asia, they tried to give him, part of their territory. And he was like, no, look, I didn't come here accepting whatever you're going to give. I came here allowing you to keep what I might leave. That was the plan. In philosophy, he's saying, is the same way with your time. It's not accepting the time that you have left over. It's allowing you to keep what it will leave behind. Turn to her, therefore, with all your soul. Sit at her feet, cherish her. A great distance will then begin to separate you from other men. You'll be far ahead of all mortals, and even the gods will not be far ahead of you. Do you ask what will be the difference between yourself and the gods? They will live longer, but by my faith, it is a sign of a great artist to have confined a full likeness to the limits of a miniature. The wise man's life spreads out to him over as large a surface as does all eternity to a god. There is one point in which the sage has an advantage over the god, for a god is freed from terrors by the bounty of nature, the wise man by his own bounty. So what he's saying here is he's saying, look, here's the thing. You need to turn to philosophy, obviously, is what he's saying, and you'll be far ahead of other men, okay? And even the gods will not be far ahead of you, okay? Because here's the thing, all right? They live longer. So it's a sign of a great artist to put a greatness into a smaller thing, right? So if you can have the wisdom, the perfection of the mind that a god would have in a long period of time, but in a short period of time of your life, that's even better. That's amazing. And he's saying that the one thing that you have over the gods is that they're freed from the terrors of nature by the bounty of nature, by who they are, but you're freed by your own self. And so that's actually an advantage. In verse 12, he says, what a wonderful privilege to have the weaknesses of a man and the serenity of a god. The power of philosophy to blunt the blows of chance is beyond belief. No missile can settle in her body. She is well protected and impenetrable. She spoils the force of some missiles and wards them off with the loose folds of her gown, as if they had no power to harm. Others she dashes aside and hurls them back with such force they recoil upon the sender. Farewell. So it's saying that the thing about philosophy, okay, is that you can have the weaknesses of a man and the serenity of a god. The philosophy can blunt the blows of chance, okay? Nothing can harm you. No chance can harm you. You reflect them back. You have no problem dealing with what life throws at you because you don't allow it to affect you. And that is the power of philosophy. And that is it for today. We'll see you tomorrow.